Hi everyone, my name is Zidan and I'm going to discuss the Makro IJA midterm questions. And if you want to access the My Learning Drive, you could access through Zidan Berkuliah, which Z and B-nya capital. And okay, let's get started. Let's start with the problem number one. So in problem number one, there are 4 questions related to workhorse model. Okay, let's address the A problem. So in problem number A, we could see there are 3 main questions in here. The first one is why the ES curve has a negative slope, and the second one, why the LM curve is horizontal line instead of having positive slope. And the third questions is derived the aggregate demand curve based on ESLM model. So to address the first problem, okay. To address the first problem, why the IS curve has a negative slope? Well, it's because it is derived from real market equations. And as we know, real market equations, real market equations is y equals to C plus G. So this is the real market equations, aka goods market. Okay. And then from this, we can rearrange the equation so that it forms I equals to Y minus C minus G. Okay. From here, we already found the goods market equations. And then, as we know, in the loanable fund market, saving is equals to Y minus C minus G. So this is the as you can see in here, the equations is basically the same, y minus c minus g. And because of that, we can make them equals. So I is equals to S, aka investments equals to savings. So this is the IS market equilibrium. And from here, we know that in goods market or in real market, when interest rate increase, investment decreased. This is because there is an increase in the opportunity cost of doing an investment. So this relationship occurs, and because of this, the slope of IS has a uh negative slope. Okay, that's the first one. And then the second one is why LM is a horizontal line instead of upward sloping. So before we address this problem, you have to know what LM curve is. So LM curve is a curve that reflects money market equilibrium, and it could be horizontal or upward sloping. So two slope is basically very possible. Two shapes, whether it's horizontal or upward sloping, both are very possible. So what makes the shapes differentiated is the policy central banks use. If the central bank use interest rate targeting policy, then they will get the horizontal LM curve. However, if CB use money supply targeting, then they will get the upward sloping LM curve. Why? Because in interest rate targeting policy, or in the class, we call it modern ways. In the modern ways approach, uh, we target the interest rate. The interest rate should not change when the money demand or ES increase. So when money demand increase, for example, like this, from MD to MD action, then the interest rate should be the same. So how could we keep the interest rate the same? Well, it's with increase in money supply. So because of that, interest rate doesn't change, because when money demand increase, we change the money supply. Interest rate still constant. Hence, the LM curve will be horizontal. And in contrast with money supply targeting here, we target the money supply. So in this traditional way, money supply doesn't change. We keep the money supply constant. So when there is an increase in money demand here, to make it still equilibrium, we increase the interest rate. So when money demand increase, ES increase, the interest rate increase. So the LM curve shapes upward sloping. So both ways are basically possible, but because in the modern ways, all countries across the world using the modern approach, which is interest rate targeting, the LM curve shapes horizontal. Okay. Next, the last questions from A point. Derived AD based on ISLM. So, when we're talking about derived a curve, there are two ways. The first way is by using a graphical approach, and the second way is by using the mathematical approach. Both are correct, but well, my advice is you just use one of them because there's a limited of time. But if you still have plenty of time, you can use both approach. But in here, I show you guys both approach. The first approach is by a graphical approach. If you want to derive a curve, well, you want to derive aggregate demand curve, right? So it's just from the ISLM equilibrium, and then you make a line from the up to the bottom, and then you just draw the curve. And here are the derived AD based on SLM. But if you want to do the mathematical approach, you could elaborate the IS equation. Here, the IS equation, and then LM equations. And then you write down the AD aggregate demand equations. And as we know, ISLM showing the relationship between Y and interest rate, while the aggregate demand shows the relationship between GDP, Y, and price. So there is a difference in the endogenous variable. So because of that, if we derive aggregate demand, we construct all of the variables that related to I because it belongs to ISLM. So this variable and this variable is eliminated. So AD is equals to G, T, EX, and IM. And there's actually a consumption in here, but because consumption is very related to real balance, as we know, consumption is, you already know consumption, but real balance is basically it's money demand. So if you want to do consumptions, you need money, right? So it's very related, consumptions and real balance. So we can substitute the consumption with real balance. And the goals of these substitutions is basically you want to see the correlations between price and Y. So yeah, that's why you substitute this. And then you get this aggregate demand equations. And as you can see, this is very related because both showing the goods market equilibrium. Okay. And then point B, explain how the AS curve is derived and why PC curve has a positive slope. So again, there are two questions in here. The first one, how AS curve is derived. As I said before, if you want to derive something, you could use graphical approach or mathematical approach. In here, I use the mathematical approach because, well, it's so much easier. If you want to derive AS curve, you should know that it is derived from the price setting and weight setting. And then After you know that, you could just write down the price setting equations and then weight setting equations. Okay, after we found these equations, we need to substitute this so that we can find the equilibrium. So price equals to this, and then we substitute this W, aka wage, to weight setting equations. So we found this equation, right? And after this, U in here is unemployment rate, all right? So from here, we can define unemployment rate as 1 minus M, which is employment rate, divided by L, which is labor force. And we also assumes that Y is equal to N. We assume this because we assume that every output that is produced need labor. So Y is equals to N. And then from here, we can substitute it into these equations. And from these equations, unemployment rate equations, we can change this into this. And then finally, we found the aggregate supply curve equations. And from this relation, we know that if Y increase, then employment will increase, which means unemployment rate will decrease. And this decrease in unemployment rate will increase the wage. All right. And because wage increase, price will increase. So the relation is Y increase, P increase. And then the second question is why PC curve, Phillips curve has a positive slope. The answer is it's because employment rate has a positive relationship on change in inflation rate, which uh, we can found this change in employment rate from inflation minus expected inflation. All right, with the assumptions of targeted inflation same as previous periods, we found this equation. And from here, because we assume y is equals to n, which means if y increase, this one increase, and will increase, then inflation will increase. All right. And then the C questions. Explain how the effect of expansionary policy, which I assume this is monetary expansion on the output level, can be greater when our course model includes exchange rate market. And then you are asked to compare the case without exchange rate market. So without exchange rate, we can see the IS equations is as given, with the exchange rate not related to anything because there is no exchange rate market. And from there, we also know that in the financial market, after we derive the UIP equations, uncovered interest parity equations, we found this exchange rate equations. From here, we can substitute the exchange rate in here into these equations if the exchange rate market exists. So this is the without exchange rate and this with exchange rate market. So without exchange rate market, the effect is like this, but with exchange rate market, the effect is there is a depreciation. All right, the increase in interest rate, expansionary policy, will decrease the interest rate, and because of that, the depreciation will increase because there are uh, capital uh, capital outflow. Okay, so from here, from exchange rate curve, we can say that expansionary policy will depreciate the exchange rate, and then will expand Y even further. Will expand the GDP even further in the medium run. Why in the medium run? Because as we know, there is J curve. In J curve, we also know that in the depreciation will detrimental in the short run, but in the medium run, it will adjust so that the net export will eventually increase. Okay. And then for the last questions, this is the ultimate questions because it asks the workforce model in general. You are asked to tell the macroeconomic story from disequilibrium to equilibrium using monetary interest rate policy starting point. Okay, so from here, we should address all four markets. The first one is ESLM, which is goods and money market. So when monetary policy occur, aka the interest rate, aka the money supply increase, money supply increase, then the real balance will increase. And because real balance increase, like this, you don't have to draw this, but you can if you want. And this is money supply, it's money demand. All right. So when money supply increase, so this is disequilibrium. Oh my God, I'm sorry, my draw is very bad. Okay, money supply increase, right? Okay, here. Ta-da! Here, money supply increase. The real balance will increase. Ta-da! Here. And because of this, the interest rate will decrease. Okay. And after that, Y will increase because as you can see in investment curve, this is investment, this is interest rate, negatively slope. In investment curve, when there is a decrease in interest rate, the investment will increase. So it will affect ES curve. So the Y, aka the GDP, will increase. Okay, that's from ISLM. And from there, we can continue into the next market, which is exchange rate market. When the interest rate decrease, it will decrease the domestic currency. It will affect in domestic currency depreciations because there is a capital outflow. Okay, because there is a capital outflow from UIP equations, uncovered interest parity equations. Domestic currency depreciation will occur, and because of that, yeah. So that's the second market. Okay, continue. Let's continue to goods market, which is represented by aggregate demand curve. All right, so this is the equilibrium, and then this equilibrium occur, which is the increase in aggregate demand. Why there's an increase in aggregate demand? Because money supply increase, and then real balance increase. Real balance will cause the increase in aggregate demand. All right, which is affecting the GDP increase. Okay, that's from goods market. So we already know that the LM curve don't shift to the downward, and the aggregate demand shift to the right. Okay. And then let's continue in the medium run, which is the labor market. When the we already know that y is equals to n, so we can change this y into n, or we can use this. All right, so when n increase, it means when y increase, it means n increase, right? When GDP increase, it means the amount of labor needed increase, which means unemployment decrease. When the unemployment decrease, workers' bargaining power increase, as we can see from wage setting equations. So from this point, let's call it A point, it goes to a action point. Okay, so that's the labor market equations. From here, we know that when unemployment decrease, the wage will increase from these equations, and then the inflation will increase. Here, the inflation will increase, causing the change in inflation increase. Okay. And then finally, from there, we can go back to the good market in the long run. So in medium run, we know that the price is increased. And in the long run, because wage increase, right? Because wage increase, there is a shift in aggregate supply. Aggregate supply shift to the left because in the aggregate supply equations in here, wage is basically this function. So when this function is increase, then the price will increase. And then in the long run, the result is y, the GDP is constant. Go back to the natural rate of, sorry, the potential GDP rate, potential GDP level. Okay, go back to potential GDP level, but with an increase in price. And it depicts with this graph. So from here, right, from here, the AS curve decrease, shift to the left. And the final result is increase in price with constant or the equilibrium, the Y, the GDP go back to the equilibrium. Thank you. Okay, problem 2 is relatively easier. So you are given the long articles. I won't read the articles, but I have highlighted the important things. The first one is inflation remains too high. So in this economy, in the US economy, the inflation remains too high because this banking turmoil. And the market continues to be very tight. And then there is a price instability in there. Also, the GDP growth, the real GDP growth is just 0.4% this year. And yeah, that's the important things. And from the questions, you are asked to provide the relevant narrative to those charts. So it is relatively easier because you are given the charts. So the chart is already given by the problem setter. So you don't have to worry about the chart. And he says, has a clue in here. The clue is inflation remains too high as the starting point. So you should answer this with narrative and begins with inflation remains too high. All right. So in this market, the starting point is at A accents because the inflation remains too high. All right. And because the starting point in here, it's not in the equilibrium. It's kind of unusual, but yeah, this is the conditions. And the policy that is effective to use in these situations is contractive policy, which in the graph, he uses the contractive monetary policy. All right, with contractive monetary policy, it will cause the money supply to decrease because he uses the modern regime, which is the uh, interest rate targeting. If you still confused what is interest rate targeting, you can see the first part of this series. Okay, when the money supply decrease, the real balance will decrease. When real balance decrease, the interest rate will increase. And because interest rate increase, the GDP will slow down. The GDP will decrease. All right. Why? Because you can see from investment curve, uh, and also the goods market equations that when interest rate increase, investment will decrease, which causes the decrease in the decrease in GDP. And then you could also elaborate the exchange rate market. So because interest rate is increased, it means there are a capital inflows. Why capital inflow occurs? It because UIP equations, aka uncovered interest parity equations. And from here, the result is exchange rate appreciate from here to here. All right, from this point to this point. The exchange rate appreciate will causes the decrease in NX, which will lead to slow down the Y even further. All right. And then you could also elaborate the labor market because they are not ask you to explain about the aggregate demand and aggregate supply. They only give you this three graph of these four markets. So you just have to elaborate this. Okay. And then you can elaborate from the labor market, which in the labor market, the inflation will slow down. This is because after contractive monetary policy is applied, the change in inflations, which is inflation minus inflation's expected, return to zero. So from here, from a action, after the contractive monetary policy, okay, here, through contractive monetary policy, the inflation decrease. So yeah, that's the way you elaborate. And also because this is the narrative, you are asked to give some narrative answer, you should be more creative. Probably you add some J curve, and also if you have still so much time, you could add aggregate demand curve, probably. But if you have limited time, because this is only 30%, you should focus more on the question number one. Then I think this answer is enough. Okay, thank you. All right, let's continue into number three. So number three is very macroeconometrics heavy, and if I'm not mistaken, it hadn't been covered in the regular class, meaning the Prof. Ija didn't cover it. However, it was fully covered in the assistancy class, and I really recommend you guys to watch the assistancy class since, if I'm not mistaken again, in the last year, all of the questions are were covered in the assistancy class. So if you watch assistancy class, you'll be safe in the midterm. Anyway, let's continue. So in the problem three, the A questions is based on three keys indicators indicated in class, provide the economics interpretations. So what are three key indicators? These three key indicators are p-value, r-square, and coefficient. So from p-value, well, I'm assuming that You are already know p-value and r-square because you take statistic class, right? P-value is the the uh the the tools in statistics to know the significance of models. So if p-value is less than 5%, meaning that your model is significant. In these tables, all of these p-value are lower than 5%, meaning that all models are significant. However, there is one models that is not significant, which is MIU. MIU is significant is insignificance because the p-value is higher than 5%, which 43%, very high. And then from R square, all models shows relatively high R square, which is higher than 60%. However, for E in here, equation E and equation MIU are relatively low at 33%, which is this 33%, and 1% respectively. Meaning the exogenous variable A equations, the exogenous one is really is just reflecting 32% of the models. So it's not really good models. However, in MIU, it is even lower. It is only 1%. So all exogenous variables in MIU models is only showing 1% of the actual MIU movement. All right, so both are not really good model. Okay, from coefficient, in here, I just got an initiative to write down all of the coefficient, all of the equations, but you don't have to if you don't want to. If you have very limited time, I don't think they expect you to write down all of the coefficient. However, in coefficient, it is necessary for you to write down this. All variables are significant except for I, interest rate in investment. This in this. Right. As you can see, the p-value is higher than 5%. So it means that uh, interest rate is not significant statistically. And then interest rate in MIU, also insignificant. And then profit in MIU. And then uh, U in P. Okay, I guess it's unemployment in P, and then COVID in P. These are insignificance throughout the models. And then let's jump into the economics interpretation. And the economics interpretations, as you can see in here, R square for MIU is relatively low, and then p-value also shows that MIU is insignificant through the models. Also, you can see the COVID and interest rate in MIU also showing insignificancy, meaning that UIP breaks down. What does that mean, UIP breaks down? As you learn in the class that if the crisis happens, sometimes UIP or uncovered interest parity doesn't work as they should. For example, like this one, UIP didn't shows the correlations between the interest rate and also the exchange rate. So UIP breaks down. That's the economics interpretations. All right. In the number 2, to the extent of 3 SLS. So 3 SLS method is the method when you what is it? You calculate all of the equations together to avoid the correlation between variables. All right. So in this point B questions, you are asked to explain the mechanism by using the resulting coefficients when central bank raises interest rate. All right. So this is relatively easy because as you can see before in here, the interest rate, a lot of interest rate are insignificant throughout the models. For example, like interest rate in investment is insignificant, meaning that you shouldn't consider interest rate in your mathematical equations. And then for interest rate in MIU is also insignificant. So the thing that you should cover in point B is only interest rate in M or money circulated. All right. Interest rate in M is significant because as you can see, it is lower than 0.05%. Yeah, 0.05 or 5%. Because it is lower than 5%, meaning that this interest rate is significant throughout the money circulated model. So you should interpret this. Increase 1 unit in interest rate would result in increase M by, you can see the coefficient in here. Just have to copy paste it. By this number unit. All right. And if you want to replace the M with money circulated, it is also fine. But remember, you should really make sure what is this variable means. All right, that's all for me. And don't forget to watch assistancy class. Also, if you want this material, you can access through my Bitly. Thank you, guys.